Hello and good afternoon, everybody. It is Sunday the 21st, and it has been a few days now since the final chapter of the Dominaria United story has come out, so I figured I've had enough time to think about it, and you've all had enough time to read it, so it's time to sit back and just have an earnest conversation of the story, my opinions on it, a little review for it. So, before we begin, I just want to stress that this video is not intended to spit vitriol or hate at the author of the main 5 chapters, Langley Hyde. I think in terms of writing, Langley did a fine job, and I also believe that the individual authors of the side stories, I think they also did a fine job with what they were given. But, at the same time, I need to stress right at the beginning, I absolutely fucking hated the Dominaria United storyline, and I cannot think of a worse... entry to the magic lore since War of the Spark Forsaken. This was a downright offensive entry for Magic the Gathering. The entire thing was just god-awful almost as soon as it started. I'll be a bit fair, though. I'll start with the good before going into the bad. The good. The side stories were overall fine. A lot of people really loved the Squee story, and it's easy to see why. Squee is a very likable character, and when he's just on his own, isolated, doing his own thing, it's very fun. But I didn't like the Squee story. I thought it was fine. I hate how they just kind of made him no longer immortal, just like they made Zur immortal, for kind of no reason. There was no real story purpose to it other than they wanted it to happen. But I did like the Education of Ulf, I think it was called. The second side story, it's the one where Jared Carthelion shows up at the halfway point. It starts out as a bit of a espionage mystery, I want to call it, but it turns into this full-blown swords and sorcery hero kind of adventure halfway through, and it was very amazing seeing Jared Carthelion and Gaedrone Dahada returning to the lore after a 20-something year break. They've been gone for a fucking while. It also answers 2 questions for me. A, was Jared actually a planeswalker? And the answer is yes. And, are these characters still alive? And the answer is, yes. Another thing that I liked about the story, etc., in general, the Phyrexians have, most of the time, when you're examining Phyrexians, when you're encountering Phyrexians, they are these violent, single-minded monstrosities that want to change everything and are completely and wholly dedicated to their goal of completion. They're invaders, they're subverters, they're monsters. But it's a bit dark, but during the story, there were several times when the Praetors, Sheoldred and Elesh Norn, they had this kind of affection for Karn. It showed in the way they talked. They referred to him as father, and they very clearly have plans. They wanted him to notice what they were doing. They wanted him to be involved with their goals. Yeah, obviously they wanted him to be involved in an evil kind of way. They clearly want to corrupt him and make him a Phyrexian like them, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. But I think it was sweet in a horrifyingly morbid sort of way that even after all this time, even after Karn has made it his life's work to destroy New Phyrexia, that the Praetors still have this, deep down they still want him to be their father, in a horrifyingly, Phyrexian sort of way. With that out of the way, let's get into the bad. All of it's bad. This story was fucking awful. Where do I start? I don't even like the Squee story. The Squee story wasn't that good. I mean, I liked Squee, but it was marred with the Ertai. Let me organize. So, there are many problems with this story. The Dominaria United story. The first one is that stories are still too short. We have 5 very short chapters, each of them about the length of one of, a short article. You can read these short stories in about 10 minutes, and there's only 5 entries. So in the course of less than an hour, you've gotten the entire story of a set, and that's supposed to hold you off for 3 months, and it's not enough. More to the point, when stories are so short, there's not enough room to work with. The first story, where Karn is excavating and your time is being taken to describe what's going on, how his feelings are towards these other machines, how his feelings are towards the people of Dominaria ignoring him. Don't worry, we'll get to that. It felt very nice. The first chapter felt really good, and it tricked me into thinking that this was going to be a solid entry to the series. I thought, after reading chapter 1, I was very hopeful. I thought this was going to be great. And then chapter 2 hit. And then from chapter 2 to 5, it was very rushed. It felt like there was not enough time to accurately describe what was happening. In chapter 5, they were suddenly on the mana rig from years ago, and I feel like I just kind of glazed over when they said they were going there. No, it was just, we're fighting on the mana rig now, and Sheldred's a giant worm monster. It just kind of felt, whoa. Things like a Johnny being completed. We're not explicitly told when that happened. We're just kind of supposed to infer that it happened off screen at some point. If not during this story, then before it. It was bizarre and insane to think about that such a key event just kind of happened off screen. So yeah, it was very short. The first chapter felt very nice, and the rest felt crunched. Another big problem I have is the in-universe actions of some of the characters. Everybody treats Karn like shit in this storyline. They discount his fears and worries and his warnings. And I don't know about you, but if I were a citizen of Dominaria, if I was somebody living on that world, the Phyrexian invasion did not happen that long ago. It was only a few hundred years ago that the entire world was plunged into this apocalyptic war. And it's not like it's a distant memory. There are people alive, lots of people alive today who have clear memories. There's the dragons, there's Joda, there's Jaya, Joyra, important leaders from across the globe who are very much aware of the threat Phyrexia posed and the possibility of its infectious nature. So when Karn, who is also very old, very knowledgeable, and hands-on, knows the best about this subject on account of his first-hand experience with New Phyrexia, when he approaches you and says, hey, New Phyrexia is here on Dominaria, we have to start rooting them out, I am completely flabbergasted that at any point Wizards of the Coast thought it was okay to say, and people ignored Karn. I thought that was nuts. Oh, Karn's just worrying. No, that's insane. Fuck off. That's not a realistic response to the warnings of somebody who's experienced it firsthand on a world that has experienced Phyrexia firsthand. It feels like WotC has this blatant despising. They blatantly despise their established lore. And that's one example. There's others too, though, like the way Phyrexian sleeper agents are treated in these stories. In these stories, they're not treated like these humanoid-shaped Phyrexians who are just very good infiltrators, spies, and subversionary agents like they were back in the old Urza stories. No, here they're treated like the fucking Thing, where they burst out of their own skin like horrifying monsters and are virtually impossible to put down easily. It's crazy to think about that WotC could look at how sleeper agents used to be and just go, yeah, no, fuck that noise, we're going to do it differently now. Another problem I have is how Saheeli just kind of popped up at the end of the story in like 2 paragraphs and went, yeah, okay, well, the Silex was broken, but I can make a new one. And she does. If I'm reading it right, she makes a new Silex for them to use. But those are problems I have, and I have problems with other things like certain paragraphs being written, but I'm not going to get into that because I'm not a critic. So the major problem I have is Ertai. Now, for those of you who don't know, and you should because I covered him on this channel recently, Ertai died hundreds of years ago on Dominaria, sure, so he could be revived there, but the problem isn't that he died on Dominaria hundreds of years ago. The problem is that he was explicitly turned to ash. There was nothing left of him to revive. Period. There was just nothing there. Ertai was turned to dust by Squee, just completely gone. Yes, they say that, oh, well, Sheoldred revived him. Fucking how? More to the point, fucking why? Ertai died and was turned to ash, and he wasn't a very powerful Phyrexian. He was a skilled wizard, don't get me wrong. He was a very powerful, skilled wizard, but he wasn't a particularly important Phyrexian. He wasn't very important in the grand scheme of things. Meanwhile, Krovax, the Evankar, the leader of Phyrexia's forces during the invasion, was only like a room or two away, and he was only cut in half, and he was been dead the exact same time, and Krovax would be far more powerful. They explicitly say back then that Krovax is far more powerful than Ertai. It's astounding to me that they would choose Ertai to bring back. It's unrealistic to me to think that they would bring Ertai back, and they have no way of bringing Ertai back. But Krovax, who is in the next room, mostly whole, he's just been cut in half, he'll be fine, and is far more important, far more powerful. Krovax makes a far better choice, but that's not the only problem here. After the events of War of the Spark, a huge chunk of the Strixhaven story was dedicated to telling us that dead people should stay dead, and WotC's staff members have gone on record saying, yeah, we want dead people, we want dead characters to stay dead, we want Gideon to stay dead. It was supposed to be this whole closure thing with Liliana, how she gets over Gideon's death despite her being one of the most skilled and adept necromancers in the multiverse. They make this big point of going out and saying death is permanent, and when characters die, they should stay dead. This is a character, Ertai is a character who didn't just die, he was like fucking destroyed, he's gone. You don't revive dust, you don't get biomass out of that, there's nothing there to work with. So, it's insane to me to think that they would go and say, oh, Gideon must stay dead, but Ertai, he deserves life. It flabbergasts me, it pisses me off too, when they show this, I don't know, I don't want to call it hypocrisy, but just stupid and lazy story writing when they're like, oh, Ertai can just come back. We can just bring Ertai back. I feel like I've rambled on about that long enough, though. So, closing thoughts, I think it's fucking stupid. Closing thoughts, this story, more than any other, was very wrong. It was very poorly done. In it, there was a lot of non-action action. There was a bunch of Among Us, so there was that. And none of it really felt like it was going anywhere up until the very end. There was a lot of fighting for the sake of fighting and a lot of plot moving forward for the sake of plot moving forward. But I'm not here to criticize that. I'm here to criticize the story itself, the characters of it, Karn, Joyra, Teferi, and Sheoldred especially. And it just wasn't good. It just wasn't. And it feels like it's hard to get across how much I dislike the story, but let me say this. There are people I know who completely checked out of the Magic the Gathering storyline after reading War of the Spark Forsaken. There are people I know who thought the differences between the Ikoria novel and the Ikoria cards were horrible. I personally stopped reading the Magic story on this channel after Call Time, I believe, and I picked it up again briefly for Kamigawa, but then stopped. But I thought Call Time was a low era. Right now, I can say with some sincerity, a lot of certainty at least, that the Dominaria United storyline is one of the lowest points that the Magic lore has ever been in. I didn't even talk about the Weatherlight being completed. That's also just an awful thing. Why would Shauna think that putting Phyrexian technology on the fucking Weatherlight would be a good idea? No one would think that. That's just unfucking reasonable. That just happened because the fucking writers thought it would be a good idea. Fuck it, I'm done here. That's it. I'm done. Have a good day, guys. Thanks. Bye.